Sherlock Holmes and the Curse of the Ebony Spear. Chapter 1. A Late Night Visitor. I have often remarked upon the singular manner in which the most extraordinary cases of Mr. Sherlock Holmes fall into our laps during the most unsuspecting moments. Indeed, it was the middle of a bleak November night, sometime in the latter half of the 19th century, when I was roused by the insistent clamour of our bell at 221B Baker Street. The hour was late, and London lay slumbering under a thin haze, the street lamps casting pale coronas in the damp, fog-laden air. As I stirred from my chair, where I had been dozing over a medical journal, Holmes himself appeared at the threshold of our sitting room. His lean figure was half lit by the soft glow of the remaining fire in our grate. With a slight arch of the eyebrow, he signalled that we were about to receive an urgent call. I could sense it in his expression, for whenever some cryptic or pressing matter presented itself, his grey eyes shone with anticipation. Such was the case now. When I opened our door, I found a man dressed in a thick overcoat standing just beyond the flickering lamp in the hallway. He was tall but stooped, with hair dishevelled and eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. Streams of cold November rain dripped from the brim of his hat. In his right hand he clutched a valise, as though he had hastily packed and fled for refuge. "Forgive my intrusion at this unseemly hour," he said in a voice that quavered with exhaustion or fear, perhaps both. "I had no choice but to come at once. I trust I am addressing Dr. Watson or Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" "I am John Watson," I replied, stepping aside. "Pray do come in." He offered but a quick nod before crossing our threshold, setting his valise upon the floor. From the posture of his shoulders I could see relief mingle with trepidation, as though he scarcely believed he had found safety even here. Within moments I had procured a dry towel and offered him a seat near the crackling fire. Holmes, already poised in his armchair with an air of polite curiosity, waited only until our visitor was somewhat composed before speaking. "You are in some distress," observed Holmes. "Have no fear. May I ask your name and your reason for seeking us at this hour?" "I am Wilfred Colby," replied the gentleman, pressing the towel to his face. "A clerk and personal assistant to the late Professor Alistair Milbank. I come from Lower Cranston, an estate in the outskirts of Sussex. Professor Milbank was found, and he was found dead just 2 nights ago." A silence fell, the only sounds being the steady drip of the rain against the window and Mr. Colby's laboured breathing. Holmes steepled his fingers, leaning forward with studied attention. "Under what circumstances was the professor discovered?" Holmes inquired, each syllable carefully pronounced. Mr. Colby hesitated, his pale face betraying deep unease. "He was found in his study by the housekeeper. She heard a dreadful noise during the night, like a scuffle. When she ventured inside, she saw him lying upon the floor, his eyes wide, and in his hand, clutched so tightly they struggled to remove it, was a strange spear, black as ebony." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. There was a subtle shift in his countenance. A layman might have missed it, but I knew him well enough to recognize that Mr. Colby's revelation had ignited in him that spark of curiosity he so keenly relished. "I gather," Holmes said softly, "this ebony spear is the reason for your alarm. Is it a unique artifact?" "I believe so," came Mr. Colby's hushed reply. "I have never seen its like. The professor had returned from a trip to Africa some months ago, bringing various objects for his private collection. But from what I gleaned, this spear in particular was said to be cursed." His voice dropped on that final word, as though unwilling to utter it aloud. While I am a man of science and tend not to traffic in superstitions, I could not deny a faint prickling at the nape of my neck. Holmes, for his part, remained composed, though I noticed he pressed his fingertips together in a thoughtful gesture. And there were no signs of forced entry, he pressed. No footprints, no broken window latch. Mr. Colby shook his head. None that anyone has reported. The staff is in uproar. Some whisper that the spear did it, though that is, of course, nonsense. Still, a fear has gripped the household. Please, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I beg you to look into this matter. The local authorities do not seem inclined to view anything beyond a tragic accident or natural causes, but I cannot rest until I know the truth. Holmes studied the man with that penetrating gaze which so often made both friends and strangers feel transparent. You spoke of the professor's Africa trip, he said, taking up his pipe and knocking it lightly on the mantel. Did he ever mention trouble acquiring these relics, and quarrels, rival collectors, perhaps even warnings from the local tribes? Mr. Colby swallowed. Yes, indeed. The professor had a colleague, Colonel Alderton, who possessed a similarly keen interest in African antiquities. I overheard them arguing about the spear's rightful ownership shortly before the professor's death. The professor seemed adamant that he alone had the right to it. However, he never confided much to me. I fear there may be more than meets the eye. Holmes shifted in his chair. I presume you have brought any notes or letters that might assist us? At once, Mr. Colby reached into his valise. He withdrew a slender sheaf of papers, each covered in the professor's tidy script, though the margins showed heavy blotting, as if written in haste or agitation. Handing them over, he said, "They may be of some use." I salvaged them from the professor's desk before the police arrived. Holmes accepted the documents and scanned them. Although he turned the pages slowly, I knew well that his mind missed nothing, devouring each line. I noticed repeated references to the Night Whisper tribe, he murmured, half to himself. And here, mention of a protective curse for any who defile a sacred relic. He tapped a line with his fingertip. Very curious indeed. I refilled Mr. Colby's teacup and offered a comforting hand to his shoulder as I spoke. You have done the right thing in coming here, Mr. Colby. Rest assured that Mr. Holmes and I will do everything in our power to see this matter resolved. Our visitor managed a grateful nod, though he seemed weary in the extreme. Thank you, Doctor. Watson? To be frank, I was not certain you would see me at all, given the lateness of the hour. Holmes exhaled a thin ribbon of smoke from his pipe, an act I had come to associate with the calm that precedes his sharpest deductions. Fate, Mr. Colby, often chooses such quiet hours to bring her enigmas to light. I propose we set out for Lower Cranston on the earliest train tomorrow. Until then, you must secure a night's rest. We have a spare room here which Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, will prepare for you. Mr. Colby bowed his head. You have my deepest thanks. I only hope it is not too late to save others. The staff. They are quite terrified that another tragedy might befall them. Holmes rose and placed the sheaf of papers upon our side table. Rest assured, sir, I take such matters seriously. As my friend Dr. Watson will attest, superstition and fear can often mask very earthly motives. We shall see which it is in this case. At that I guided Mr. Colby to the guest room. The poor fellow's shoulders sagged as though the weight of the ebony spear pressed upon him as well. Yet even as I closed the door quietly behind him, my thoughts were on Holmes. I knew from the gleam in his eye that his mind was already at work, connecting subtle threads, anticipating the next clue. Back in the sitting room, I found him standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out into the swirling mist of Baker Street. An African relic, he murmured without turning around. A sudden death, last words, it knows. Did you note the phrase, Watson? Curious. I do not believe in coincidences, especially not under these circumstances. His silhouette was a testament to unwavering resolve, and I felt certain that come the dawn, we would venture forth into a tangle of secrets as complex as any we had yet encountered. Little did I know just how entangled we would become, or how dark the shadows cast by that so-called cursed relic truly were. Chapter 2. The Disquiet at Lower Cranston. It was with the earliest rays of a pale autumn sun that Sherlock Holmes and I set forth from London to the outskirts of Sussex, bound for the estate known as Lower Cranston. Mr. Wilfred Colby, who had arrived at our quarters under such distress the night before, accompanied us, though he spoke scarcely a word during the journey. He sat hunched in his corner of the railway carriage, his eyes flicking anxiously towards every station we passed. Holmes, for his part, perused a modest leather-bound volume on African tribal customs, a text that Mr. Colby had brought along from the late Professor Milbank's library. I occupied myself with my medical journal, though I confess my mind strayed more often than not to the curious events awaiting us. As we drew closer to our destination, the lively bustle of London's outskirts gave way to rolling fields and patches of sparse woodland. Eventually the train pulled into a small, unremarkable station with a single porter stamping his feet to ward off the chill. The porter recognized Mr. Colby at once and directed us to a waiting hansom, which would take us the final distance to Lower Cranston. The approach to the estate was lined with towering elm trees. Their bare branches, stripped by the season's winds, stood like silent sentinels. Thin morning mist curled across the gravel drive. Even from some distance, one could perceive that Lower Cranston was a grand residence, though in that day's wan light it cast a sombre silhouette. It was a sturdy structure of grey stone, with narrow windows that overlooked expansive grounds now tinged brown and gold with autumn. Looming ivy clung to the walls, and in the hush of dawn the place felt somehow watchful. Upon alighting from the carriage, Mr. Colby led the way up the wide front steps. A subdued hush clung to the air as we were admitted by an elderly butler, whose lined face revealed the stress the household had endured these last days. We found ourselves in a spacious entry hall bedecked with a curious mixture of European antiques and African relics, no doubt the fruits of Professor Milbank's expeditions. Spears, masks, small carved figures and tribal shields hung upon the walls, their presence lending an otherworldly quality to the otherwise traditional English decor. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," the butler intoned with a bow. "I am Andrews. Mrs. Farnham, our housekeeper, awaits you in the study. This way, if you please." We followed him down a corridor hung with ancestral portraits. The hush was broken only by the soft pad of our footsteps upon the carpet. I could sense the tension that seemed to pervade every corner. Servants moved quietly with lowered voices, casting nervous glances at us as we passed. Holmes observed them keenly. I was accustomed to that rapt intensity in his gaze, the quick gleaning of details about each person's demeanor, attire, or mannerisms. Presently, we reached a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. Andrews rapped gently before opening it to reveal a large study. Bookcases lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and the faint odor of must and old leather rose to greet us. A broad desk stood in the center, its surface neatly ordered, though certain spaces indicated that something had been removed. Indeed, likely the notes that Mr. Colby had taken to Baker Street. Two high-backed chairs faced the cold hearth, and in one of them sat Mrs. Farnham, the housekeeper. She was a woman of middle years, her features drawn by sorrow but marked by a steadfast sense of duty. Rising upon our entrance, she curtsied lightly. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice hushed. Thank you for coming. Holmes inclined his head. Madam, I understand it was you who first discovered the unfortunate demise of Professor Milbank? She pressed her lips together. Aye, sir. 2 nights ago I heard a commotion from the corridor, like a cry or an exclamation. I hesitated but a moment, for the professor is not a man I'd intrude upon lightly. When at last I found the courage, I opened the door and— Here she paused, swallowing hard as though reliving the ghastly memory. He was on the floor. I could see no wound upon him, but he was quite gone. In his hand was that wretched spear, black as pitch, though how it got there I cannot say. Holmes moved carefully about the study, his keen gaze roving over the shelves and floor. Did you notice anything disturbed? Any sign of forced entry or a struggle beyond the commotion you heard? She shook her head. No, sir. Everything was in place, save for the odd arrangement of papers upon his desk, but no window was broken, no lock was forced. Holmes crouched near the hearth, studying the faint smudges of soot along the grate and the presence of a half-burned log. He then turned his attention to the broad window. It was closed, though the catch looked to have been tampered with in a subtle manner, no more than slight scratches. He ran a fingertip over the metal as if testing for fresh marks. What of the ebony spear now? I asked. Where is it kept? Mrs. Farnham paled visibly. The local constable took it for examination, but returned it the following day, as he saw no reason to hold it. It is— She paused, swallowing her unease. It is back in its display case in the next room, where the professor once exhibited his African collection. Mr. Colby was adamant it should be locked away. We exchanged glances with Mr. Colby, who nodded gravely. I felt it best to secure the artifact, he explained. Staff had begun whispering about curses and the like. It is no secret the professor believed certain relics might carry malevolent power, if not handled with respect. Holmes, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly spun on his heel. I shall like to see that case, if you please, and afterwards Dr. Watson and I shall conduct our own inspection of this study at greater length. In an adjacent chamber, we encountered what might be termed a private museum of sorts. The professor's zeal for African lore was evident in the collection. Intricately carved masks, tall spears, beaded garments, and clay vessels. At the center stood a sizable glass display case containing the ebony spear. It was indeed an arresting object, roughly 4 feet in length, of dark wood so polished it shone like obsidian. At close range, one could discern faint etchings along its shaft, whorls and symbols reminiscent of ancient tribal markings. A chill seemed to emanate from it, though I attributed that to my own imagination. Holmes examined the case meticulously, running his hand along the glass. Locked, I see, he noted. Only one key? Yes, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Colby affirmed. It remains in my keeping. Though I assure you not one among the household would dare open, he nodded, shifting uncomfortably. Colonel Alderton being foremost among them. The professor and he had a heated disagreement not long after the professor's return from Africa. But Colonel Alderton is not here. He lodged in the village inn for a spell, though no one has seen him these past few days. Holmes pursed his lips. Interesting. I should like to speak to him in due course. Now, as for the professor's condition at the time of discovery, was there truly no wound, Mrs. Farnham? Her face grew pensive. The doctor from the village said the professor's heart had quite stopped, but no outward injury could be found, almost as though sheer terror overcame him. We fell silent, and I couldn't help but steal a glance at Holmes. His eyes were narrowed, his brow furrowed in deep thought. At length he spoke again, in a low, measured tone. This ebony spear, accompanied by tribal lore about curses, a bitter disagreement with a rival collector, no apparent wound upon the deceased, locked doors, and no sign of forced entry. Indeed, it is a puzzle, Watson. As I opened my mouth to respond, a timid young maid appeared in the doorway, curtsying awkwardly. "Pardon me, sirs," she said breathlessly. But, Mrs. Farnham, there is a matter at the servants' quarters. One of the maids claims to have seen a figure drifting in the yard at dusk. She is quite hysterical." Mrs. Farnham sighed. "So it begins again. This house is full of shadows and fear since the professor's passing." Holmes gently closed the case. "Let us not yield to dread. We must remain rational, even as we acknowledge that something out of the ordinary is afoot. Mr. Colby, Dr. Watson and I shall first finish our inspection here. Then we may speak to this frightened maid. Sometimes in the ravings of those most terrified, a glimmer of truth is revealed." I could see the maid trembling, her eyes wide at the prospect of stepping back outside. Yet I also discerned in Holmes that unshakable poise he displayed in all manner of crisis. Indeed, I had faith that whatever menacing secret lurked behind the professor's death and this uncanny relic known as the Ebony spear, my friend would bring the beam of reason to bear upon it. Still I could not quiet the faint chill stirring in my own breast, for seldom had I felt a place so overshadowed by unease as Lower Cranston. And our investigation was only just beginning. Chapter 3. Seeds of Suspicion. It was late morning by the time Sherlock Holmes and I concluded our initial survey of Lower Cranston's shadowed corridors and hushed rooms. The mood among the staff had grown no less tense. Servants moved with hurried steps, glancing over their shoulders at each squeak of a floorboard or distant footfall. I could see plainly that fear lingered in every corner, fanned by whispered rumors of a curse. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated by the mystery. His keen eyes roamed ceaselessly, alighting upon the smallest detail. A scrap of mud on the stair runner, a scuff mark upon a seldom-used door. And all the while, he maintained an air of cool detachment. I had seen this aspect of him many times before, an almost inhuman focus that allowed him to sift truths from the most confounding circumstances. Shortly after noon, we found ourselves in a modest sitting room used by the staff on their breaks. Mrs. Farnham had arranged for the frightened maid, Betty, to meet us there. Betty was a slight, nervous girl, her apron crumpled from twisting it in her hands, and her eyes were red from tears. She kept glancing at the doorway, as if expecting some dreadful figure to appear at any moment. "Have no fear, my dear," I said gently, hoping to put her at ease. "Mr. Holmes and I merely wish to understand what you saw last evening." She nodded, though her voice trembled when she spoke. "It was near dusk, sir," she said. "I was feeding scraps to the stray cat that lingers by the kitchen door when I caught sight of something, a shape like a tall man standing by the edge of the gardens. I couldn't see his face, but I heard a low sound, almost like chanting, though I couldn't make out the words." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze intent. "A tall man, you say? Was there anything else distinctive about this figure? His clothing, his posture?" Betty's cheeks paled. "He wore a wide-brimmed hat, or so I thought, and a long coat that seemed to swallow him up. She paused, shivering. "I know it sounds silly, but I thought he was holding something in his hand, a long stick, or perhaps," her voice fell to a whisper, "perhaps a spear." At that pronouncement my pulse gave a small jump. Though I do not favor superstitions, the notion of the ebony spear being carried through the grounds at dusk was enough to send a chill along my spine. Holmes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "And you are certain of what you saw?" Betty glanced down. I cannot say with utter certainty, sir. The light was poor and I was frightened, but I know I saw a figure near the hedge maze looming there. The next moment he vanished into the mist." Holmes thanked her for her time and gently recommended she go about her duties, assuring her we would delve deeper into the matter. When she left, he stared pensively at the empty seat where she had been. "Well, Watson, what do you make of it?" he asked at length. "An intruder, perhaps," I ventured. "Someone skulking about the estate with motives yet unknown. Colonel Alderton, if we accept Mr. Colby's story of their rivalry, might fit the description. He could well be searching for the spear, especially if he deems it valuable." Holmes nodded, but did not confirm or deny the suggestion outright. Instead, he rose abruptly. "I see no reason to remain idle. Let us speak with Colonel Alderton himself. Mr. Colby did mention the man had been lodging at the local inn, though absent these past few days. Perhaps the proprietor can enlighten us." Thus we set out on foot to the nearby village, which lay half an hour's brisk walk from Lower Cranston. The autumn sun overhead did little to dispel the sense of foreboding that pressed upon my mind. The fields were quiet, and a breeze rustled through the last of the brown leaves, scattering them across our path. We arrived at the village to find a quaint street of shops and a small church spire rising beyond them. A sign bearing the words "The King's Horn" marked a cozy public house, its doorway flanked by flower boxes, now wilted by the cool weather. Inside, the landlord greeted us cheerily at first, though his expression sobered when Holmes inquired about Colonel Alderton. "Ah, yes," sighed the landlord, a stout man with a mop of curly grey hair. "The Colonel. He kept a room here for near a fortnight. Paid handsomely, he did. But I've not clapped eyes on him these 3 days, packed up in a hurry, I'd wager. Left before dawn, if the scullery lad is to be believed." Holmes pressed for details. Had the Colonel said where he might be headed, or the reason for his abrupt departure? The landlord, wiping at the bar with a rag, shrugged. He was in high dudgeon the night before, muttering under his breath about that blasted relic and how it should have been his. Drank more than was his custom, if you take my meaning. Next thing I know, he's vanished. My friend's features tightened with interest. Did he happen to mention the ebony spear by name? The landlord's eyes widened slightly. "Indeed he did, sir. Said the professor had no business claiming it. That it rightfully belonged to him. Something about the professor not understanding the artifact's true significance." Holmes gave a low hum of comprehension. "I see. My thanks for your assistance." Nodded in agreement. "Indeed, Watson, but I suspect Colonel Alderton is not the sole piece in this intricate puzzle. Recall the professor's notes, mention of a tribal guardian or curse. It may well be that the Colonel sought the spear for his own ends, yet there could be another party, equally determined." Our return to the estate was punctuated by an unsettling discovery. As we were crossing the lawn, we saw a group of servants gathered near the garden hedge, whispering anxiously. At our approach, they parted to reveal another man, a gardener by his attire, holding up a small scrap of cloth dark with mud. It bore the unmistakable greenish hue of the local inn's livery. "Found it snagged on a thorn bush," the gardener muttered, eyeing Holmes with a mixture of wariness and hope. "I recognize the color. The chap from the inn wears coats like these." Holmes examined the cloth, nodding slowly. "Most intriguing. Colonel Alderton may have been here last night lurking by the hedge, or so it would appear." Before I could voice my thoughts, a commotion from the direction of the house startled us. Mrs. Farnham, out of breath, came rushing across the lawn, skirts gathered about her. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she cried, "you must come at once. Something has happened in the professor's study." Fearing the worst, we followed her swift strides back into the house. There, in the dim hush of the study, we found Mr. Colby wringing his hands as he stood beside the professor's desk. The drawers had been pulled open and certain papers scattered on the floor. Notably, the locked chest, previously unopened, was now forced wide, its lid splintered where a crowbar had evidently been applied. It appears someone broke in, Colby gasped, his face ashen. I had stepped away but 10 minutes. One of the footmen reported hearing a crash, and when we arrived... He gestured helplessly to the scene of disarray. I fear crucial evidence has been taken, though I cannot determine what was inside. Holmes knelt by the chest, running his fingertips along the jagged break. A most direct intrusion. The culprit possessed either great determination or desperation. He glanced at the scattered papers. Were these the professor's private correspondences about the spear? Colby nodded. Yes, some. But I have no idea what else might have been here. The professor was secretive about certain acquisitions. There could be letters, sketches, or something more specific to the ebony spear's origin. I saw Holmes's gaze turn thoughtful. Another step in this relentless pursuit. The question remains, who took these documents, and for what purpose? He stood, brushing dust from his knees. We must not overlook the possibility that the colonel is not acting alone, or that an entirely different party is at play. At that moment, the butler Andrews stepped in, clearing his throat. Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but the staff is quite alarmed. They wonder if more mischief is at hand. Holmes turned, his grey eyes steeled with resolve. There is mischief indeed, Andrews, but I would urge everyone to remain calm. Dr. Watson and I intend to uncover the truth. He paused, glancing at the shattered chest once more. Above all, let no one attempt to move the ebony spear from its display, nor meddle with anything further. That relic may be the heart of this puzzle, and we cannot afford to lose sight of it. With that final pronouncement, Sherlock Holmes fixed his attention on the torn papers and battered chest, every sinew of his mind bent on unraveling the forces conspiring around the ill-omened ebony spear. As I stood by his side, I felt the weight of Lower Cranston's disquiet more keenly than ever. Dark secrets and fervid ambition had converged upon this estate, and I feared there would be no peace until Holmes's brilliant deductions cast a revealing light upon every hidden corner. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. Night settled upon Lower Cranston with an air of expectancy, as though the estate itself held its breath against the shadows. Even the autumn wind, which had blown briskly all day, calmed to a faint whisper among the eaves and barren trees. The lamps in the corridors were turned low, leaving long pools of darkness that seemed to stretch and shift with every step. It was under these disquieting conditions that Sherlock Holmes proposed a silent vigil, one he deemed vital to uncover the mischief surrounding the ebony spear. "We must remain awake tonight, Watson," he said, tapping a forefinger against the mantel in the professor's study. "Whoever trespassed here earlier will not be dissuaded by mere daylight commotion. Indeed, I suspect they will use the cover of darkness to pursue their aim anew." I agreed without hesitation, for though my nerves were somewhat on edge, I could see no better way to apprehend the intruder than by catching him in the very act. Mr. Wilfred Colby, fraught with worry, offered to stand guard with us, but Holmes declined. "A single misstep or unexpected noise could alert our quarry," he explained. "Dr. Watson and I have practiced stealth in such matters. It will be a two-man operation." Thus resolved, we dined in uneasy quiet, then took our position soon after the household retired. Holmes ushered me into a small alcove off the corridor, leading to the late Professor Milbank's study. There, concealed by a thick tapestry depicting some long-forgotten family crest, we could peer through a narrow gap into the dimly lit hallway. A single lamp flickered at the far end, casting fitful shadows that danced against the walls. Time passed slowly in that cramped space. Now and again, I heard distant footfalls from the floor above, a patrolling servant perhaps, and the soft hoot of an owl beyond the windows. Holmes, for his part, remained utterly motionless, save for the occasional tilt of his head as he listened for any sign of disturbance. I could hardly see his face in the gloom, but I knew his senses were fully alert, the faint reflection in his eyes revealing that intense mental focus for which he was justly famed. At length, my foot began to tingle from remaining so still, and I shifted my weight gently. In that very moment, a sound reached us, a low murmur, as though someone were conversing in hushed tones not far away. Holmes touched my shoulder, a silent indication to remain utterly still. The murmurs grew more distinct, yet I could not make out actual words. It sounded less like English and more akin to a chant or incantation, rising and falling with a peculiar rhythm. A faint light appeared at the corridor's end. It flickered like a candle, bobbing unsteadily as though carried by an unseen hand. The chanting ceased abruptly, replaced by a more urgent whispering. My heart pounded painfully, and I prayed that our concealed position would not be betrayed by the sound of my breathing. Then the silhouette of a figure slid into view, just beyond the circle of the lamp's glow. I glimpsed only a partial outline, a tall form, shoulders draped in what might have been a cloak or coat. The candle's flame revealed nothing of the individual's face. The figure seemed to hesitate, then made its way toward the study door, which lay only a few steps beyond our vantage point. I felt Holmes lean forward, his entire being tense as a drawn bow. We heard the faint creak of a doorknob turning, only the door was locked by our own arrangement. Mr. Colby had locked it thoroughly, keeping the ebony spear in the display case within. Or so we believed. The figure paused. Another muffled exchange of whispered words ensued, though to my frustration I could discern nothing intelligible. Suddenly, as if deterred by the locked entrance, the intruder turned and glided back so profound that I wondered if the figure had vanished entirely. My mind raced with questions. Did we see one individual or two? Could Colonel Alderton, rumored to be lurking about, have come with an accomplice? An hour may have passed without further incident. My pulse had just begun to settle when a shrill cry tore through the stillness. It was the kind of sudden, piercing scream that freezes the blood. Holmes wrenched the tapestry aside, and we rushed from our hiding place into the corridor, only to be halted in our tracks by what lay before us. The door to the study stood ajar, though I could have sworn it had been locked. Worse yet, in the middle of the corridor lay the ebony spear, dark against the pale floorboards, and at its tip glistened fresh droplets of blood. Holmes dropped to his knees, gingerly lifting the spear by its shaft. His grey eyes flicked upward. "Watson," he murmured, "there has been violence here." A moment later, Mrs. Farnham came rushing around the corner, her face stark with alarm. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, come quickly. There is blood in the corridor upstairs as well, and one of the maids cannot be found." We followed her at once. Upon climbing the broad staircase, we found a small, chilling pool of blood congealing near the banister. Threads of it smeared along the floor, as though someone had been dragged. My stomach tightened at the implication. A cluster of wide-eyed servants huddled near the wall, whispering fearful exclamations. "She's gone!" And he took her. I had no notion who he might be, but terror laced every voice. Holmes knelt again, studying the trail. A few drops, then a gap, then more. The victim, I fear, was carried rather than walked. But where? He traced the pattern to a side corridor that ended in a locked storeroom. By this time, Mr. Colby, roused by the commotion, had joined us, his countenance pale. The key to the storeroom had to be fetched from the butler, and we made haste to open it, the group of staff pressing behind us. Inside we found nobody, thank heavens for that, but the disarray told its own story. A broken lamp on the floor, a basket of linens overturned, and scuff marks upon the dusty floorboards. Holmes knelt to examine footprints, pressing a finger lightly into the settling dust. I heard him murmur to himself. Larger footprints heading out again, as though a second door is at play. Indeed, a moment later, he found a small side exit, typically used by staff carrying supplies to and from a back stairwell. It stands to reason the intruder used this path to abscond with the victim, he announced quietly. But how and why? And was the ebony spear used as a weapon, or is it a theatrical ploy to frighten us all? Mrs. Farnham, her hands clasped tightly, looked as though she might faint. "Dear Lord, Mr. Holmes, you must find the girl. She is but 16, her name is Lucy. She would not harm a soul." "I assure you, madam," Holmes said, gently yet firmly, "Dr. Watson and I shall do all in our power to locate Miss Lucy. Meanwhile, see that none of the staff roam these halls alone. Let them move in pairs at least until we know more." As he spoke, I could hear the others muttering about curses and tribal spirits. The ebony spear, with its fresh stain, loomed larger in their imaginations than any mortal villain. Though I share no credence in curses, I must confess that the entire scene, blood on the corridor floor, a missing maid, and that grim relic lying abandoned, stirred a creeping dread in me as well. We returned to the study below, where Holmes carefully placed the ebony spear inside the display case once more, snapping the glass lid shut with an air of finality. "This time, we lock it not just with a key, but we shall also place watchers at either end of the corridor," he declared. "I will not have this spear vanish again under our noses." Mr. Colby appeared near tears, shaking his head. "Holmes, this is beyond comprehension. Have we invited an unearthly force into our midst?" Holmes's jaw tightened, and I saw the fire in his eyes. "Perhaps so, Mr. Colby, if one subscribes to superstition. But I hold firm to the belief that a cunning flesh and blood perpetrator is orchestrating these horrors, exploiting the legend of this relic to sow fear." As we stood in that silent room, the ebony spear gleaming darkly under the lamplight, an oppressive atmosphere settled upon us. Somewhere beyond those walls, a young maid's fate hung in precarious balance, and the cunning presence that haunted Lower Cranston remained at large. Holmes' arms folded across his chest, turned to me. "We must rest, Watson, for dawn is near. Yet our investigations cannot relent. Be prepared for what morning may bring." Little did I know, as I took one last glance at that dread artifact, that the events of the following hours would plunge us further still into the labyrinth of secrets and terror surrounding the ebony spear. We left the corridor under watch by two trusted footmen, lamps in hand, and retreated at last to snatch a few hours of fitful sleep. My dreams were filled with flickering shapes and distant chanting, the haunting echoes of that whispered voice in the dark. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. A grey dawn broke over Lower Cranston with little comfort. The sky bore a dull cast, as though the coming day promised only to prolong the pall that hung over the estate. Sleep had been a fitful ally for me. My dreams were troubled by images of that strange figure in the corridor, the ghastly sight of blood upon the floor, and above all, the sinister gleam of the ebony spear. Even so, I rose early, determined to rejoin Holmes in whatever fresh investigations the morning might demand. I discovered my friend already at work in the professor's study. He stood by the window, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. On the desk before him lay the late Professor Milbank's diaries, tall, leather-bound volumes filled with the scrawling script of a man consumed by both curiosity and perhaps growing dread. Holmes had spent part of the night, or so I suspected, poring over these entries, seeking any clue that might illuminate the vile events unfolding around us. He acknowledged my entrance with a small nod and gestured for me to approach. "Observe, Watson," he said, in his quiet, deliberate way. "The final passages in the professor's hand. Though the writing grows erratic, he makes repeated references to the covenant broken and an entity or presence he calls the Night Whisper. Indeed, the ebony spear is mentioned time and again, accompanied by dire warnings. I bent to read a few lines. The scrawl was unmistakably frantic. They told me not to remove it. The relic belongs to the Night Whisper tribe, and it carries their vengeance. I fear I have awakened something that cannot be placated. The words sent a small shiver down my spine, though I endeavored to keep my composure. "Holmes," I murmured, "you are certain we deal with a mortal agency here, are you not?" The staff grows ever more convinced that some dark power has been loosed upon the estate. Holmes closed the diary and tapped its cover with his fingertips. "I confess," he said, "there are elements here I cannot yet place. Whispers of curses, tribal guardians, the repeated appearance of the spear at scenes of calamity. Yet I remain convinced that somewhere at the core lies a human design, albeit one cloaked in superstition." His gaze shifted to the ebony spear, still locked in its display case. "Still, we must not discount the real power such beliefs can exert of Lucy." The anxiety etched upon his features was plain to see. "The staff have searched the grounds as best they can. Some say she was spirited away by the spear's influence, but I cannot abide such talk. We must find a more rational explanation." "We shall," Holmes said firmly. "Where is Mrs. Farnham?" "Gone to comfort the staff who are too frightened to resume their duties," Mr. Colby replied. "The entire household seems on the brink of panic, and—" He hesitated before continuing. "I have learned that Colonel Alderton was sighted once more at the edge of the estate last night. One of our gardeners claims to have seen a figure matching his description moving among the trees." Holmes set aside the diary. "This colonel emerges time and again. It grows likelier that he has a hand in this affair, perhaps driven by envy or some misguided conviction that the spear rightfully belongs to him. I propose we search the grounds immediately. Watson, we must not neglect a single outbuilding or nook where he or Lucy might be concealed." Thus, a thorough exploration of Lower Cranston's exterior began. We combed the stables, the old carriage house, and even the half-ruined folly near the pond. Holmes led the search with characteristic method, pausing at intervals to examine footprints or fresh scuff marks in the earth. I noted how his sharp gaze lingered over an abandoned gardener's shed, its door slightly ajar. Venturing inside, we discovered naught but dusty tools and a few empty sacks. "Colonel Alderton does not appear to be so easily cornered," Holmes remarked wryly, stepping out again into the windy morning light. "Still, if he is truly on the premises, we must remain vigilant." We returned to the house without success, at which point Mrs. Farnham intercepted us in the foyer. "Mr. Holmes," she said anxiously, "something is amiss with the professor's trunk. The locked one in his private chambers, it seems to have been tampered with. I noticed the key had been moved from its usual place." Holmes's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. "A locked trunk, you say? Show me at once." Accompanied by Mrs. Farnham, we ascended a back staircase to the professor's bedchamber. It was a stately room furnished in dark woods and smelling faintly of dust. A large iron-banded trunk stood at the foot of the bed, a formidable padlock securing its lid. Holmes knelt to examine the lock, running his finger over fresh scratches on its metal surface. "Someone attempted to force it with a slender instrument, akin to a small chisel or a thief's pick," he pronounced. "They did not succeed, but the attempt alone speaks volumes. Might you have the key, Mrs. Farnham?" She retrieved it from her apron pocket, explaining that she had confiscated the key from its usual location in the professor's desk drawer upon noticing the lock's damage. With her trembling hand, she offered it to Holmes, who inserted it carefully, lifted the lid, and peered inside. The trunk was filled with journals, sketches, and carefully wrapped artifacts. Among them were old letters sealed with red wax, their writing in an elegant but unfamiliar hand. Holmes removed the topmost letter, casting his gaze over a few lines. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Correspondence from an African tribal elder named Makula, apparently addressed to the professor. This elder warns the professor not to remove the spear from its sacred grounds. Indeed, the language is most grave." I leaned over his shoulder to read a snippet. "In the name of our ancestors, do not break the covenant. This spear is bound to the spirits of our land. To steal it away is to invite their wrath." The words chilled me, conjuring the memory of the professor's frantic scrawls in his diary. Holmes replaced the letter in its envelope and carefully explored deeper into the trunk. Nestled beneath a layer of yellowed papers, he found a small pouch of thick cloth. Loosening its drawstrings, he drew out a carved amulet, fashioned of the same dark wood as the spear, though smaller and etched with symbols. He turned it over in his hands. "Another artifact," he remarked quietly, "akin to a key, perhaps, or a talisman linked to the Ebony spear's legend. It may be that the professor intended to keep these items safe from prying eyes. Let us not forget that the trunk shows signs of attempted entry. Who besides the professor knew of these contents?" Mrs. Farnham wrung her hands. "He kept such matters private, sir. Only Mr. Colby was trusted to sort through the professor's acquisitions. Colonel Alderton may have known of them given his rivalry. As for the rest of us, we had no reason to handle these items." Holmes nodded. "It is vital we keep these documents secure. Lock the trunk once more and guard the key. Should Colonel Alderton be behind the break-in, he may attempt again." He gave me a grave look. "And let us keep the amulet in our possession for now, Watson. It might prove essential." We descended to the study once more, the amulet wrapped in soft cloth in my coat pocket. There we found Mr. Colby pacing in agitation, while the housemaids clustered anxiously by the door. The ebony spear still glinted through the glass of its display case, black as midnight. "Any luck in the search?" Colby asked. His voice trembled ever so slightly. "Not yet," said Holmes. "But we have discovered further proof that the professor was well aware of the spear's dark reputation. Lucy's disappearance, coupled with last night's intrusion, suggests a heightened desperation. The question remains, who stands to gain from perpetuating or exploiting this superstition?" Mr. Colby lowered his head. "Colonel Alderton claims the spear was his by right. Could it be so simple a motive as theft?" Holmes pursed his lips. "Perhaps. And yet Lucy's abduction suggests a deeper cruelty at work. We must consider whether a third party, some clandestine figure, covets this relic for reasons beyond mere monetary value." As the afternoon hours crept by, Holmes tasked the estate staff with renewed vigilance. Groups of 2 or 3 were to comb the extensive cellars, attics, and side wings. All the while the knowledge of that terrifying chant in the corridor haunted me. Whomever had brandished the spear and left it blood-stained in the night was still at large, and Lucy's fate remained distressingly unknown. Thus the quiet hallways of Lower Cranston once again bristled with uneasy activity. Lanterns and torches lit every corner, and the scuff of boots and whispered words carried through the gloom. Yet a part of me felt that these efforts, though earnest, might prove fruitless if the perpetrator possessed a secret cunning or an accomplice within these very walls. Holmes himself prowled from room to room, sometimes pausing abruptly to examine a patch of floor or a decorative tapestry that seemed misplaced. His mind, I knew, was weaving countless threads together in search of a unifying pattern. Still, as days slipped toward dusk, no triumphant cry of discovery escaped his lips, and so, with Lucy missing, Colonel Alderton looming ever closer to prime suspicion, and the Ebony Spear's menacing legend casting a dark shadow over each passing hour, we braced ourselves for what fresh horror or revelation the coming night might bring. We had opened the door to the shadows of the past, and only Sherlock Holmes's keen intellect stood between the dread-laden illusions and the truth we so desperately needed to uncover. Chapter 6. The Collector's Web. The next morning dawned with an overcast sky, and a heavy stillness weighed upon the corridors of Lower Cranston. The household's unsettling night lingered in every anxious glance and hurry of determination running beneath his calm facade. Shortly after breakfast, if one could call our strange silent repast by that name, Holmes summoned Mr. Wilfred Colby, Mrs. Farnham, and Andrews the butler to the study. He stood by the Ebony Spear's display case, hands clasped at his back, every inch the investigative authority. I took my customary place at his side, notebook ready, should any vital clue emerge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "we stand at a precipice. This household has been plagued by a crime, or crimes unknown, a disappearance, break-ins, and the repeated suggestion of a supernatural danger. Dr. Watson and I are resolved to uncover the truth, but we shall require your cooperation. The Ebony Spear must remain securely locked here for the time being. No one, under any circumstances, is to move it without my express permission." His words drew uneasy nods from the small audience. Even so, I caught the flicker of dread in Mrs. Farnham's eyes. She clasped her hands as though in silent prayer. Mr. Colby looked as though he might speak, but checked himself. Andrews stood with an impassive face, his posture rigid. Holmes, seeing no dissent, concluded with a courteous bow of his head. "Now, let us redouble our efforts," Holmes continued. "A thorough search of the house is ongoing, but Lucy remains missing. Colonel Alderton, the likely suspect, is said to be lurking in the vicinity. If any of you observe even the slightest sign of his presence, report it to Dr. Watson or me immediately. We must leave no stone unturned." When the others departed, Holmes turned to me, a certain intensity in his gaze. "Watson," he said, "I mean to speak with Colonel Alderton face to face. If he will not present himself at Lower Cranston, then we shall find him. We have enough testimony placing him on or near the estate's grounds at suspicious intervals. It would be remiss not to confront him with our questions." "Indeed," I agreed. "But where to find him, Holmes? Last we heard, the fellow had vacated the local inn." Holmes let out a thoughtful hum. "Rumors can often guide us where logic alone falters. We shall discreetly inquire among the townsfolk, those not connected to Lower Cranston. If Colonel Alderton has been seen, we shall discover when and where." Thus we donned our coats and set out on foot toward the village. The day was chillier than its predecessor, the wind turning raw as we skirted the estate's boundary wall. Old elm trees clawed at the sky, their branches rattling with the promise of winter. As we walked, Holmes paused more than once to study footprints in the softer patches of earth, damp after the recent drizzle. "Look here, Watson," he said, crouching to inspect a set of tracks. "One set belongs to a man with a long stride, heavy step, possibly wearing boots more akin to military style. If Colonel Alderton once served in the army, it stands to reason these may be his prints." I peered at the partial impressions. They appear to head away from the house in the direction of the main road. Holmes rose, brushing the soil from his fingertips. "Precisely. Let us press on." Our arrival in the village saw us move among the local shops and small taverns, asking discreet questions and following the faintest whisper of Alderton's name. While most residents professed ignorance, a few recalled glimpsing a tall man prowling about, shoulders hunched in a coat too thin for the season. An older fishmonger claimed the man had offered an inordinate sum for a small boat, though for what purpose he could not imagine. Shortly after midday, we came upon a modest lodging house at the village's outskirts, a squat building whose sign swung creaking in the breeze. Holmes, with his unerring sense, announced, "I believe our colonel may be within." Indeed, upon making inquiries of the landlady, we learned that a Colonel Alderton had taken a small room there, only the previous evening. We ascended narrow stairs, each tread groaning beneath our weight. Outside a battered wooden door, Holmes paused. From within came low muttering, as though the occupant conversed with himself or another. Holmes rapped sharply. There was a sudden hush. Then the door opened a fraction. A pale face peered out, lined with the marks of sleeplessness and agitation. "What do you want?" snapped the man in a hushed, wary tone. His eyes darted nervously from Holmes to me. "Colonel Alderton, I presume?" said Holmes evenly. "I am Sherlock Holmes, a consulting detective from London, and this is my colleague Dr. Watson. We should be obliged if you would spare us a few moments of your time. Our business concerns Professor Milbank and the Ebony spear." At mention of the spear, a sudden mixture of fear and anger flitted across Alderton's features. He hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Enter then," he said, stepping aside. "But I warn you, my temper is frayed." We found ourselves in a cramped room, furnished with only a bed, a washstand, and a single, rickety chair. Alderton's bag lay half open on the floor, clothing strewn about. The curtains were drawn, lending the room an air of perpetual twilight. Without preamble, Holmes got to the point. "You had a dispute with Professor Milbank regarding the Ebony spear," Holmes said quietly. "It has now come to light that the professor died under mysterious circumstances, and that others have since come to harm. Where were you on the night Lucy, a maid at Lower Cranston, went missing?" Alderton's lips curled in a sneer. "I had no part in that, if that's your implication. Yes, Milbank and I argued. He refused to cede the relic to me, though I had every claim. But curses and missing maids, that is beyond my doing." Holmes's eyes narrowed fractionally. "And how do you explain your presence on the estate grounds, Colonel? Multiple witnesses speak of a figure in a long coat." The Colonel scoffed. "I am an antiquities collector, Mr. Holmes. I desired a final glimpse of what should be mine by right. In years past, I ventured into Africa with Milbank. We acquired relics together, but the Ebony spear was promised to me. Yet the professor took sole possession of it. I came only to observe from a distance, for I have no illusions about forcibly taking it. The local authorities would never support my claim." Holmes regarded him intently. "And Lucy's abduction?" Alderton's face darkened. "If you suggest that I kidnapped the girl, I refute it wholeheartedly. I am a collector, not a fiend. I have no reason to harm some wretched maid." It was then that my attention was drawn to a side table. There, half concealed beneath a folded newspaper, lay a small carved wooden object, an African figurine etched with the same swirling patterns we had seen on the Ebony spear. I gestured silently for Holmes to notice it. He stepped forward, lifting the figurine to the weak light at the window. "Curious," he murmured. "This appears to belong to the same tribe that carved the Ebony spear. Do you claim rightful ownership of this as well?" Alderton snatched it back, his hand trembling. "That is none of your concern. Consider it but another artifact from my travels." Holmes did not press the matter overtly, but I suspected his agile mind had stored the detail away. "Very well, Colonel," he said gently. "I shall take you at your word. For now. However, mark me. If you are indeed skulking near the estate for reasons unknown, this does not aid your case. Our investigation continues." Alderton's gaze flickered and his mouth twisted in a grimace of pride, mingled with resentment. "I do not fear it." We took our leave, descending the stairs in silence. Outside, the wind tugged at our coats. I breathed in a lungful of sharp autumn air, eager to dispel the sense of claustrophobia that had clung to Alderton's room. "Well, Holmes?" I ventured, as we trudged back toward Lower Cranston. "Do you place credence in his protestations of innocence?" Holmes remained thoughtful. "He is undeniably obsessed with the ebony spear, but I discerned in him not so much the cunning of a kidnapper or murderer, but rather the desperation of a thwarted collector. Whether that absolves him remains to be seen." He shot me a sidelong glance. "I suspect there is another hand at play, one that we have yet to properly confront." By late afternoon, the estate loomed before us once more, its windows darkening against a bleak sky. The staff had begun lighting lamps, setting them in rows along the corridors and staircases to stave off the deepening gloom. Whispers drifted in hushed clusters. Lucy still lost, the ebony spear a silent sentinel behind glass, and dread continuing to gnaw at every heart. As we crossed the threshold, Holmes paused near the great hall, turning to me with resolute eyes. "Our conversation with Colonel Alderton has only stirred the waters. Tonight, Watson, let us keep our wits sharper than ever. A storm is brewing, and I fear the ebony spear's influence, whether real or cleverly contrived, will soon draw all these threads to a head." In that moment, as the wind moaned against the old stones of Lower Cranston, I could not help but wonder if we were close to uncovering some monstrous secret, or merely stepping deeper into a labyrinth of deceit and superstition. In either case, I knew Sherlock Holmes would not rest until reason's light pierced even the darkest corners of that ancient and haunted estate. Chapter 7. The Clue Beneath the Surface. Dark clouds gathered over Lower Cranston that evening, casting the estate into a premature twilight. A cold drizzle began to fall, tapping against the windows with a steady, dismal cadence. Within the ancient walls, a pall of dread seemed to intensify. Every echo along the corridors caused servants to start, and every gust of wind rattling the shutters brought fresh murmurs of unease. Yet Sherlock Holmes pressed on, resolute, determined to unearth the secret that kept Lucy vanished and the ebony spear entangled in a web of superstition. After our fruitless confrontation with Colonel Alderton, Holmes and I returned to the study, intending to take stock of the clues thus far collected. Mr. Wilfred Colby greeted us at the threshold, his face drawn from worry. "Mr. Holmes," he began softly, "the staff is at their wits' end. One of the housemaids swears she heard Lucy's voice in the dead of night calling out from somewhere below the floors. Another claims to have seen a flickering lantern pass through the walls like a phantom." Holmes fixed him with a steady gaze. The mind plays tricks when men and women are steeped in fear. Still, we must not dismiss the possibility that Lucy is indeed somewhere beneath us. Lower Cranston, by all accounts, is built atop older structures. There may well be hidden passages or catacombs. He paused, eyes flicking to the ebony spear in its case. "I propose that you, Watson, and I conduct a thorough inspection of the grounds and foundations. But first, let me examine the professor's old maps." At once, Mr. Colby led us to a large oak cabinet where Professor Milbank's cartographic archives were stored. Together we sifted through an array of dog-eared charts, some depicting foreign regions of Africa, others the British Isles. Ultimately, Holmes unearthed a faded plan of Lower Cranston itself. It was drawn centuries prior, annotated with references to subterranean chambers, storage cellars, and even a rumored network of passageways that had once served as smuggling routes in the distant past. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, running his finger along a dotted line that wound beneath the estate's southern wing. "Here, a passage from the cellar to an exterior exit near the orchard, likely blocked off in modern times. And here," he tapped a small rectangle, "what might be an abandoned crypt or sealed chamber. This is precisely the sort of clandestine place where one might hide a frightened captive, be it Lucy or someone else." A flicker of hope lit Mr. Colby's features. "You truly believe Lucy might be down there alive?" Holmes replaced the map carefully. "I see no cause for despair yet. Whether Colonel Alderton or another unknown party is at play, there is strong reason to believe Lucy has not been taken far. Dr. Watson and I will begin our search at once. Mr. Colby, please see that no one disturbs the Ebony spear and that the staff remains in pairs for safety." Without further delay, Holmes and I donned our lanterns and heavy coats, venturing down to the lower levels of the estate. The cellar staircase creaked ominously beneath our feet, and the air grew cold and dank as we descended. Faint cobwebs brushed our faces while the distant drip of water resonated in the dark. At the foot of the stairs, a warren of old storerooms and disused wine cellars awaited us. Our lanterns illuminated dusty shelves lined with cobwebbed bottles. Holmes moved swiftly, scrutinizing walls for hidden seams. Twice he crouched to trace his fingers along the stone floor, as though searching for a trapdoor or irregular patch. "Look for footprints in the dust, Watson," he murmured, his voice echoing softly against the bare walls. "Any sign of recent passage?" We soon discovered a corridor that ended in a stout wooden door, locked by a rusted iron bolt. Holmes tested it. The bolt groaned, as though seldom moved in decades. With effort, we managed to slide it free. Beyond lay a pitch-black corridor carved of rough stone, its walls damp with seepage. The stench of stale air curled about us. My heart thumped in my chest, for the place reminded me of old catacombs or crypts I had seen in my military days. The beam of Holmes's lantern fell across a scattering of debris, broken crates, rotted sacks of grain. Yet beneath that decaying clutter, we discovered footprints. They were faint and muddled by multiple comings and goings, but they told us enough. Someone had been using this corridor despite its forlorn appearance. Holmes knelt, examining the impressions. "Boot marks," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Some large, some small. At least 2 individuals. It appears one pair of prints drags slightly. Could be Lucy, frightened and unsteady. The other prints are heavier, consistent with a man's stride. We must proceed with caution, Watson." We moved deeper into the underground passage, the damp air pressing upon us. I could feel the weight of earth and stone overhead, a claustrophobic sensation that only grew as the corridor narrowed. At times I heard faint scuttling, rats or some such creatures stirred by our intrusion. Then came the faintest echo of a sigh or a moan from somewhere ahead. My nerves taut, I exchanged a quick glance with Holmes. Presently, we reached a small archway giving onto a circular chamber. Our lanterns revealed a low ceiling supported by a central column. Around the walls we saw remnants of old stones etched with carvings. Some bore the images of ancient heraldry, others, curiously, appeared to depict tribal patterns reminiscent of the Ebony spear's markings, forging a link between them. As we traversed the perimeter, I noticed a hidden recess behind a half-collapsed wall. We squeezed through, discovering a small side chamber. Its contents startled us both. Arranged haphazardly on a makeshift table were scraps of parchment, some bearing the professor's handwriting, and others an unfamiliar bold scrawl. A battered suitcase lay open, containing clothing and tarnished curios that might have once belonged to Colonel Alderton or another collector. Someone has been studying the professor's research in secret, Holmes observed, flipping through the loose notes. Look here, Watson. References to the Ebony Spear's purported power and ceremonies to awaken its essence. This document speaks of a sacrificial rite, though the details are incomplete. My stomach twisted. Holmes, do you suppose Lucy was intended as part of some vile ritual? Holmes did not answer at once. I saw a flicker of unease cross his features, swiftly replaced by cold logic. Speculation is dangerous, Watson. Let us keep searching for something more concrete. We must find Lucy, if she is indeed captive, and prevent any heinous act from taking place. We heard it then. A faint scratching or scraping from somewhere beyond the chamber. Holding our lanterns high, we moved toward the sound, guided by intermittent echoes. It brought us to a narrow staircase carved into the stone, its steps spiraling downward into deeper darkness. At the top, Holmes paused, turning to me. Be on your guard, he said quietly. We cannot know what lies below, or who. Every step down that winding staircase felt like a descent into another world. The air grew colder, the walls wetter. The rasp of our breath and the drip of unseen water accompanied us. My mind churned with possibilities. Might Lucy lie injured in some subterranean cell? Had Colonel Alderton or another cunning hand stashed her away, while employing legends of the cursed spear to terrify everyone above? We reached a landing where the staircase opened into a cramped hallway. The scratching noise was louder now, accompanied by a muffled thump, as though something or someone was behind a locked door. Holmes pressed his ear to the nearest wooden barrier, brow furrowed. Voices, he whispered, though I could only make out a faint moaning. He tested the latch which held fast, then nodded at me. Together we pushed against it. The door gave with a groan, revealing a cramped cell-like space. Our lanterns flared, illuminating a figure huddled on the floor. Lucy, pale and trembling, her wrists bound with rope. Her eyes were wide, but she was alive, stirring at the sudden light. "Lucy!" I gasped, rushing forward. She recoiled at first, then her face twisted in relief as she recognized us. Holmes swiftly cut her bindings. She clung to me, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's all right," I murmured, heart pounding with both pity and anger at the cruelty inflicted upon her. "You're safe now." Holmes crouched, scanning the cell. There were discarded plates of food, a lantern whose oil had nearly burnt out, and a ragged blanket. Whoever imprisoned Lucy here was no mere opportunist. The place looked prepared for a longer confinement. "Lucy," Holmes said gently once her sobs had subsided enough to speak. "Did you see who brought you here?" She shivered, tucking her arms around herself. "Ah, a man in a cloak, and someone else, but I never saw the second face. It was dark and they wore something over their head. They kept whispering about the spear, said I was to be kept quiet until—" "Oh, I can't bear it." Her sobs renewed. Holmes exchanged a sober look with me. It seemed our worst fears were not misplaced. Lucy had been a pawn in a scheme that ran deeper than theft or rivalry. Gently, we helped her to her feet, resolving to carry her back to the estate without delay. But as we turned to ascend the spiraling staircase, we heard the faint echo of steps above, footsteps that paused, then receded with swift caution. "They know we're here," Holmes muttered. "We must hurry, Watson." With Lucy's arm around my shoulder, we hastened upward. Yet I could not quell the dreadful certainty that we had only glimpsed the edge of a far more dangerous plot, a conspiracy that used fear, legend, and the ebony spear to deadly effect. As we emerged into the upper corridors, Lucy, safe but shuddering with horror, I found myself bracing for the inevitable confrontation to come. and in Sherlock Holmes's set jaw and burning gaze I knew he was preparing for it as well. Chapter 8. The Descent into Darkness. I recall with startling clarity the oppressive hush that settled upon Lower Cranston as Sherlock Holmes and I guided the trembling Lucy from the underground chamber. Rain sleeted against the windows, and a bitter wind howled through the cracks of the ancient estate. Though we had rescued the poor girl from an unspeakable fate, the true evil, now revealed in all its vile cunning, yet roamed free. The sense of unfinished peril pressed upon us like a gathering storm. "Holmes," I said breathlessly, supporting Lucy's unsteady steps, "we must end this madness at once. If the villain escapes, he may commit an even graver atrocity." Holmes nodded, his grey eyes alight with grim resolution. "Indeed, Watson, and I believe I know where he has fled." Turning to Mr. Wilfred Colby, who approached with ashen face, Holmes added in a cold voice, "Secure Miss Lucy, lock the household doors, and instruct all staff to remain indoors. If our quarry attempts to return, bar his way." Colby's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. But Mr. Holmes..." Holmes raised a silencing hand. "No time for argument. Watson and I have uncovered enough. We know who the murderer is, and we must pursue him. Pray for our success, lest Lower Cranston be plunged into deeper horror." With that, Holmes and I raced for the estate's main entrance, Lucy's frantic account ringing in our ears. She had seen two men in the catacombs below, one masked, the other plainly visible, brandishing the ebony spear. Yet from her partial glimpses and overheard whispers, we deduced that the masked accomplice was a hired hand, while the mastermind himself was no other than Colonel Alderton, the once suspected collector. For while Mr. Colby might have thirsted for wealth, Colonel Alderton, it now appeared, sought something far darker, the rumored supernatural power of the relic, which he believed could be summoned by bloodshed. Bursting outside into the raging storm, Holmes and I pressed through the deluge. Sheets of rain lashed at our faces as we made our way to the eastern orchard, a place Lucy had vaguely recalled hearing the mention. Indeed, as we reached the edge of the gnarled fruit trees, I glimpsed a bobbing light far in the distance, doubtless a lantern carried by a man who moved with urgent purpose. "There!" I cried over the wind. "Holmes, do you see him?" Holmes's hand shot out, guiding me behind a low stone wall. "Yes," he hissed. "We must not lose the element of surprise. If Alderton indeed believes in the ebony spear's unholy power, he may be unhinged enough to commit further violence. Keep your wits about you, Watson, and stay low." We crept forward, our boots sinking into the sodden earth. Thunder rumbled, and each flash of lightning illuminated the orchard in ghostly brilliance. In one such moment, I saw Colonel Alderton plainly. He stood near a tumble-down chapel, shoulders hunched against the gale, a hooded cloak plastered to his frame by the pounding rain. Clenched in his right hand, like a terrifying extension of his arm, was the ebony spear, black as midnight, etched with swirling tribal designs. Alderton swung the lantern back and forth as though awaiting someone or something. Then I realized with cold dread that he was not alone. A second figure, presumably the masked accomplice, emerged from the shadows, carrying a heavy sack that clanked like metal. The thunder drowned their murmured exchange, but Holmes tapped my arm and mouthed silently, "They are taking the relics! We must act now." We slipped closer, hearts thudding. I held my revolver at the ready, the barrel slick with rain. My nerves were taut as harp-strings, for never had I seen such a bleak and forbidding tableau. The orchard's twisted boughs loomed overhead, a labyrinth of black arms writhing against the storm-torn sky. Holmes suddenly sprang from behind a trunk, his voice cutting through the gusts. "Colonel Alderton, you are trapped. Put down that spear and surrender." Startled, Alderton whirled. The lantern's glow dancing across his face. I beheld pure mania in his eyes, an unhinged fervor that chilled my blood. "Holmes," he thundered, water streaming from his hood, "you meddling wretch, you cannot fathom the power I hold. The ebony spear is mine." His accomplice, equally alarmed, dropped the sack with a metallic crash. Without a word, the man bolted into the orchard's darkness. Holmes made a move to pursue him, but Alderton raised the spear threateningly, blocking Holmes's path. "Stay where you are!" Alderton spat. "One more step, and I shall see you perish under this spear's curse." I skirted around, hoping to flank him, but Alderton's eyes were wild with vigilance. He lunged forward, driving the spear toward me, forcing me back lest I be skewered. The black, polished wood glistened with rain and malevolence. In that instant I realized the colonel's mind was lost to reason. He truly believed the spear would grant him invincibility through savage rites. Holmes, with remarkable agility, leapt aside and advanced from Alderton's left. "Colonel," he barked, "the only curse here is the one you bring upon yourself through murder. Cease this madness." Alderton let out a rasping laugh that lacked any trace of sanity. "Is it madness to seek power that men have only dreamed of?" Professor Milbank was a fool, forever stymied by his conscience. As for that child Lucy, her blood was but the beginning. My stomach churned with revulsion. Lightning flashed, illuminating Alderton's contorted features and the ebony spear in his grip. In that split second I saw him tense, preparing for another lunge. Holmes, unarmed but unyielding, tried to close the distance. I raised my revolver, hoping the mere threat would force Alderton to submit, but the colonel was past all submission. With an unearthly roar, he lunged at Holmes. The detective dodged, but the spear's tip scored a glancing wound across his forearm, sending a splash of crimson onto the drenched grass. Pain twisted Holmes's face. Desperate, I fired a warning shot above Alderton's head. He jerked, but did not drop the spear. Instead, he spun toward me in a fury, brandishing the weapon like a man possessed. "You think you can kill me, Doctor?" he howled above the roar of the tempest. "Not when I wield the ebony spear, not when I stand on the cusp of destiny." I saw no alternative. Another lunge, another slash, and Holmes might be done for. In that heart-stopping instant, with the wind shrieking and Alderton's eyes blazing, I squeezed the trigger. The bullet caught him in the side. He staggered backward, shock crossing his face. Slowly, impossibly, he sank to his knees, the spear falling from his grip. For a heartbeat, he stared at the blood soaking his cloak, as though he could scarcely believe mortal force had bested him. Then, with a strangled cry, Colonel Alderton collapsed onto the mud-churned earth, the storm raging overhead. Holmes, panting, clutched his wounded arm and hurried to my side. Together we bent over the fallen figure. Alderton's breath rattled in his chest, eyes already glazing. "I was so close," he rasped, voice barely audible above the downpour. "The spear belongs to me." His gaze flickered once more, then dulled forever. The hush that followed felt as though the very elements paused to acknowledge the end of that unholy ambition. Rain still lashed the trees, thunder rumbled overhead, yet a strange stillness settled between us. Gently Holmes exhaled, pressing his good hand to my shoulder. "You saved my life, Watson," he murmured. "You had no choice." I nodded, my own heart pounding from the horror of it all. For a moment, we knelt in the swirling mire, Holmes's blood mingling with the rain, Alderton's lifeless form at our feet, and the ebony spear lying inert. No supernatural power glowed from its carvings, no curse manifested from its dark wood. Instead, it stood revealed as nothing more than a weapon of man's design, used by a twisted soul to perpetrate murder and sow fear. At last Holmes rose, struggling slightly with his injured arm, and offered me a wan smile. "Come, Watson, let us return to Lower Cranston. This dreadful affair is ended." And so, beneath a sky torn by lightning, we retrieved the ebony spear, that ill-omened relic whose legend had kindled acts of unspeakable evil. Carried in our hands, it was mere wood and polish, stripped of the dreadful mystique that Colonel Alderton had believed would grant him dominion. Whatever terror it once inspired lay dead with him upon the orchard's sodden ground. The staff at Lower Cranston later confirmed that Alderton's accomplice, an unscrupulous rogue, promised riches, fled the estate, and vanished into the countryside. But no further blood would be spilled on behalf of that cursed spear. In the days that followed, Lucy was nursed back to health, and the relic itself was turned over to scholars who promised to safeguard it from the clutches of ambition and superstition alike. Thus did we conclude the most harrowing chapter in the history of Lower Cranston. And though the ebony spear remained an object of fascination for collectors and historians, no curse would ever claim another life by its edge. Colonel Alderton's death served as a stark reminder that sometimes the fiercest horrors are those bred in human hearts, fueled by delusion and greed, and in this case, defeated by the unwavering courage of Sherlock Holmes and a single, fateful bullet. In the days that followed, Lucy gradually recovered from her ordeal, and the terrified servants at Lower Cranston found their lives returning to a calmer, if subdued, rhythm. The ebony spear, stripped of its false mystique, was entrusted to scholars who vowed to safeguard it from any future misuse. As Holmes and I made our way back to London, I reflected that the true menace had never been a cursed spear, but rather the deadly blend of greed and delusion in a man's heart. No matter how exotic or rare, an object by itself wields no power until human ambition imbues it with malevolent purpose. Colonel Alderton's descent into bloodshed stands as grim proof that those who seek dominion through fear often meet a violent end themselves. Yet the darkness he sowed was dispelled by unwavering courage and reason, virtues that must guide us in every endeavor. As we stepped once more onto the familiar threshold of 221B Baker Street, my thoughts settled on the case's deeper lesson, that evil thrives when covetousness clouds one's judgment, and how indispensable it is to keep our moral compass aligned with truth. In a world where malevolent schemes lurk behind every shadow, the unyielding light of reason and compassion is our best safeguard against the cruelties born of human greed. The end. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel. Your unwavering support keeps me motivated